Hello, everybody, and welcome to your live event today. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction. And I'm also one of your chef instructors in the courses. And I want to welcome you to my office hours. This is your chance to ask anything you'd like that's related to food and cooking, or at least I ask you to limit your questions to the domain of food and cooking. And if we can, avoid straying into questions that pertain to medicine and dietetics, that would be very much appreciated. But it's my chance at the same time to do my best to provide some feedback, some recommendations, some guidance, some conversation around the various topics that all of you introduced today. All right. So as we get started, I'd like to mention a couple of housekeeping items. And the first one is on your screen, on the right-hand side, you'll see a list of questions that folks have already sent in. And, if you would like to participate more directly by posting a question or a comment, feel free to do that. And it'll make its way to the queue. And then the second item is, as you look at the individual questions, you'll see a heart-shaped icon. And if you would like that question answered sooner than later, go ahead and click on that, and it'll bump it up in priority in the queue. Okay? And, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in, and I'll start with the first question and work my way down the list. All right? And from Carol. I'm very curious about oil-free cooking. Are you saying oils are never used to saute or roast veggies in the oven? Thank you, and I'm very new to this. Thank you, Carol, and I appreciate your question. This is a fairly common one that comes up, and I'll say that this is really directed to those of you that are in the plant-based courses, and this question comes up quite a bit among the Forks Over Knives students specifically. And let me address this broadly. Okay, so in the Forks Over Knives course, or that approach to eating, there is an emphasis on omitting added fat to your cooking for the health of it. Okay, however, we have students that are entering this plant-based way of eating from very different places. Now, each person's story is unique, and I love hearing about them, and I respect everyone's starting point. And with that in mind, we have students that are ready to go, cold turkey on the added fats, and 100% added fat-free, and others are going to ease into it. And so you're going to see some recipes that are oil-free. You might see some that have a little bit of added fat. Now, it's going to be up to you, right, to figure out where you are on your journey and how you want to approach the cooking course and how quickly you want to make changes to your diet and this lifestyle, okay? I'm going to say that in our plant-based courses, we have lessons that will walk you through the process of sauteing and sweating without oil, as well as roasting without oil. Those are the couple of primary cooking methods that we use. And so you'll learn the technique of doing those without added fat. All right. Otherwise, take it at your pace, based upon your personality, as well as the desires and needs of those that you're cooking for. All right. Making big changes very quickly can be difficult for some people. And, as we all know, I think when it comes to New Year's resolutions, many of those are kicked to the side after just a matter of several weeks because they're difficult to adhere to. So, do be reasonable and don't be hard on yourself. If you're comfortable going 100% added oil free from the get-go, all the power to you. But if you feel like you want to take steps along the way by reducing your oil first, I think that's perfectly reasonable. Okay, in the end, it's not up to me to provide advice. Excuse me, and it's certainly not up to me to judge what you're doing. It's totally up to you to figure out the solution that works. Okay, and Carol, give that a try, give that a thought, see what works, and make adjustments along the way. All right, thank you. All right, next up from Annalise. Hello. I'm a busy mom. Do you have any tips on how to meal prep or plan your meals during the week? You bet. The first principle, and maybe the guiding light here, is what we call batch cooking. And especially in our plant-based courses, we touch upon this concept. And the premise of batch cooking is to cook or prepare staple food items, and whatever that means, is going to be unique to your situation. It could be a grain, it could be a bean or a lentil, it could be vegetables. But the idea is to prepare those staple items in larger quantities at the beginning of the week. And for a lot of people, that's going to be on a, say, Sunday afternoon, looking ahead to the Monday through Friday work week. And then to draw from that inventory throughout the week, or it could be just 2 or 3 days worth of cooking that you do. It's going to be up to you. But the idea, again, is to prepare your staple ingredients in larger quantities so that you can more quickly compose dishes when mealtime comes. And if you've got 2 or 3 or 4 staple items that you prepared, you can easily change the seasonings, the flavorings, via fresh herbs or spices, as well as the condiments and other sauces that you might use to create different flavor profiles and different dishes that can be enjoyed as a bowl, so to speak, or in a wrap, to make a taco, or in added to a soup or a stew. And so there are different ways then that you can create very different meal experiences, but using the same 3, 4, or 5, let's say, staple food items. And sometimes we will cook that staple food 100%. For example, if it's a grain, go ahead and simmer it until it's cooked to the degree of doneness that you want, and then drain it and store it. Or you can even store it in its liquid. That's fine. If you're wondering what the difference might be, give it a try both ways and do some comparing and see what works best for your situation. Okay. Other times we might par cook an item or partially cook an item. And this is where we might, it could be blanching, but often it is par cooking, let's say a root vegetable, that we then will finish at the mealtime by sauteing or maybe steaming. And that, provides us a freshly cooked item as it comes out of the pan. And so again, it's just going to be a matter of for you to think about a few items to get started with. And then from week to week, you can change those staple items, as you try out different recipes or different preparations in the coming week. All right. So I hope that's helpful for you. Thank you. All right. The next question concerns jackfruit. So can you tell me some ways to use canned green jackfruit? Okay. So jackfruit, in particular in its green or unripe state, and very often it's going to be canned. It's a convenience product that's available these days, is used as a meat substitute because of its texture. Jackfruit, once it's fully ripe, takes on a very different personality. It's soft and it's sweet and aromatic, like a tropical fruit, and is more aligned with desserts or as a snack. But if you are using the green and unripe version, then you will, whether it's a fresh product or a canned product, you'll want to cook it by simmering and then break it down to tear out apart the pieces into fibers or little fibrous bundles that start to represent or mimic the look and texture of pulled meat, pulled pork or pulled chicken, for example. And sometimes it's broken down into these little strands and bundles first before simmering, but other times that sequence is reversed. It's not a big deal. Again, try it both ways, see what might work for you. Okay, your degree of cooking, your simmering, is going to be until the product is tender and comfortable to your palate. And often that's about 10 minutes. It might be give or take a little bit. So keep an eye on it, taste it along the way, so you can pull the product off the fire and strain it at that point when you think it's going to be best for you. All right. Now, the next step is to flavor it in a way that will align with however you might want to prepare it. It could be a barbecue pulled pork sandwich that you prepare, or it could be a Korean flavored stir fry that you make, or something else. So, think about the flavor profile that you would like to impart. And, it could be a wet marinade. It can also be, something that is more on the dry side, a pasty side. It could be, a dry spice-based blend that you incorporate, and then give that several hours to marinate or otherwise for the jackfruit to absorb those flavors, and then you can move forward with finishing that in the pan, to heat it up. You can put it on a sheet pan, put it in an oven and roast it in order to crisp up the edges a bit, maybe introduce a touch of caramelization, and then to mimic some of the textures and deeper flavors that you might be expecting in whatever preparation that you have in mind. Okay, so that's the basic process for handling green jackfruit. All right, thank you. All right, and we got a question from Toki, who says, I'm not worried about protein, but many are obsessed about it. What is the focus for creating healthy, balanced meals on a whole food, plant-based diet? Um, all right. So, yeah, I guess the first one is a comment. And, I'm in the US, and certainly culturally, here in the United States, there is a strong emphasis on protein intake each day and at every meal. And, according to a lot of folks in the health and wellness and food space, there's an overemphasis on protein intake. In other words, it's estimated that a lot of Americans consume more protein than they need to. And, in fact, when it comes to, some of the studies that correlate, with a dotted line, animal food intake, animal meat intake, let's say, and the incidence of cancers, it's via the protein that this becomes a concern or a problem. And so, according to again some doctors out there, some others in the medical space, to consume a little bit less protein would be fine. But that's, again, something for you to determine based upon your individual needs. All right. So what's the focus for creating healthy, balanced meals on a whole food, plant-based diet? And the premise here is going to be variety. it's not only desirable from a health standpoint, but downright enjoyable if you're eating a lot of different ingredients that you put together in different ways to make a large array of dishes. And so that's really going to be the key. And then, all ingredients, all foods provide amino acids. And amino acids are the building blocks for protein. Our body does that for us. And on an animal-based diet, you're getting all of your amino acids, in particular those essential amino acids, the 9 that our body doesn't make, and that we need to get from food. And whereas in the plant-based world, you find that a given food item will not provide the full array, the full complement of amino acids, with few exceptions. Therefore, it's necessary to eat a varied diet so that we get these different compositions of amino acids from different foods that come together in our body. And our body has its own intelligence, you might say, to deal with those nutrients and rearrange it in a way that is necessary for the body. Okay, so variety is going to be the key here. Thank you. All right, next question. Any suggestions when using dried reconstituted mushrooms so they aren't rubbery in texture? I cook them in a risotto per the recipe. In my experience anyway, rehydrating or reconstituting dried mushrooms does result in a different texture. Right, it's one that's a little tougher, a little chewier, a little rubberier, some would say. And if that's a texture that you don't like, then consider a couple of things. I mean, one would be to cut the reconstituted mushroom into smaller pieces so that it's more tender and then also less noticeable. Now, another approach is while the mushroom is still dry, to grind it to some extent. And it's going to be up to you to choose the coarseness. You can take it all the way down to a pretty fine powder and then add that to your preparations to get the mushroom flavor. And of course, the texture will be something different. Okay. And I hope you'll give that a try and see what you might like. Thank you. All right. And okay, the next one from Amy, who says, hello, Amy. I'm enrolled in the professional cook course, and I'm wondering if Rouxbe has a recommended reading list. And do you have any books that you personally recommend? I don't have offhand a list aligned with the professional cooking course of titles, but I can share some thoughts, okay, from my personal corner here. And, one is there are a number of books written by Michael Pollan over the years. And, I would recommend anything by Michael Pollan. I think they're good reads and, they're insightful. He talks about science and culture and society and, other aspects of food, beyond cooking. And then also there are a few titles by a pair of authors, Karen Page and Andrew Dornenberg. So Page and Dornenberg. The Flavor Bible, as well as the Vegetarian Flavor Bible and others, are penned by those two, and they're good. They come from a restaurant background, and so they have that sort of an approach to some technical aspects of handling food. And they can be very informative if you want to sort of push your knowledge and your skill set down a deeper path. Okay. I mean, otherwise, what I would share is that because there's so many books out there and so many books published each year on some aspect of food, and I use the word food broadly here. Okay, that I encourage you to think about what aspect of food, and it could be an aspect of cooking, of course, like preservation, or it could be history and culture, or something else about food that interests you, and to just do a search and see what you come up with, and check out some titles. I always reach for my uh, local public library first before I buy anything, and so I always suggest that for you and other students too. All right, thank you. All right, and thank you, Patrick, for posting some links to Michael Pollan, to Karen and Andrew, and also Kenji Lopez Alt, who is um, a favorite author of mine. He's with the Serious Eats web food blog, and I recommend checking that out. All right. Next up from Brian. Hello. What is one tip or trick for plant-based chefs you wished you learned earlier in your career? Um, I think that very generally, and this ties into one of the earlier questions, is that um, cooking from plant-based sources is really freeing in a certain way, because you don't need to have an emphasis on a limited number of sources of protein. In this case, I'm thinking, animal cooking, right? Where whatever we produce, people want some sort of an animal derived ingredient as one of the main items, certainly on the main course plate. We refer to that in the industry as the center of the plate. And that term connotes a cut of animal meat. And, in the plant-based world, anything goes, and it's, in a way, it's very, very fun, because you can bring in so much more variety, which we should be doing, throughout a menu that you might compose. And I think it's that perspective that is liberating in a way. It's fun, it's interesting, it stimulates a lot of new learning, and some fun conversations as well. And maybe not a tip or a trick per se, but just a different perspective. All right, thank you. And next up, another question from Annalise, who says, what are liquid aminos? Any brands you can recommend? Liquid aminos is or constitutes a seasoning that is also used as a condiment. And it's much like soy sauce, or often compared to soy sauce in its look, in terms of its dark color, as well as its umami and its saltiness that it lends to food. Okay. Liquid aminos, the couple of types that I'm familiar with are based on either soybeans or coconut. And the common brand that I see is Bragg, Bragg. And of course, there's a lot more information online if you want to dig a little bit deeper into liquid aminos. Thank you. All right, next up from Yasmin. I had my first assignment last week. I was surprised that I got a full grade, even though I thought I didn't perform perfectly. So my question is, what should we focus on in the future assignments? How difficult and challenging are they going to be? So this is an interesting question, perhaps the first time I've received this particular question. In our opening assignment, in probably all of our courses, we take it easy on you. All right. It's really an assignment to give you a chance to familiarize yourself with our platform. And it's a chance for us to see that in your response, whether it's photographically or through your text description, that you have touched upon the different elements that we requested. And it's a chance then for me and others on our instructional team to provide feedback in a very gentle environment in this first assignment. As we might give pointers on lighting for your photographs, or to include more description in your text, for example. Okay, so we grade rather gently on the first assignment in particular, but otherwise, as you move through the course, really, it's going to be, I'll say, first of all, up to you, okay, to engage at a level um, that that challenges you, and that's at a level that you want to be at, right, in terms of what you want to take away from the experience. Like any other school experience, okay, what you put into it, you will get out, okay, of the course and the experience. And as far as feedback is concerned, we'll provide feedback if we see areas that are lacking, of course, as well as sharing some experience or maybe something to try out the next time you experiment with a particular cooking method. Okay, and at the end of the day, for us, it's not about the points. It's not about your grade, whether we give you 100% or we deduct a bunch of points. It's about your learning, and it's about your demonstration of confidence and competence in these various areas that we cover. Okay. And, certainly, if you have additional questions about what you prepared, feel free to ask a question either in the assignment or you can reach out via support@rouxbe.com, and we would be happy to respond. Okay, and on the note of asking questions, we have two. Aside from asking questions embedded in your assignment response, we have two main avenues, and the first is the Q&A function that you'll find at the bottom of each task page. That's intended to ask questions that are general in nature and that other students would benefit from. If you have a unique question, a more personalized question that pertains to your situation, please reach out to us at support@rouxbe.com. Thank you. All right, next up from Patricia. Since oil is something we're trying to avoid, is vegan mayo something we should eat? So, as a continuation of the earlier response in today's program, it's going to be up to you. So veganase, right, or these vegan mayonnaise sort of products are based on oil. And it's going to be up to you to decide if you want to use that or not. I don't mind if you use the product, but I want you to be satisfied with whatever results that you're after. Okay, so this brings me to a point where I'm going to spend maybe a minute or so and talk about this idea of developing a food philosophy. Many of us have a religion, right, or some sort of a spiritual guiding light that helps us through tough times and helps us deal with questions and conundrums. And I think when it comes to food, which for me is a big deal, and I think it's a good idea that we develop a personal food philosophy, and one that will help us move through these difficult times and challenging questions like, shall I eat vegan mayonnaise? It's an individualized question. And, it's not one that I can answer for other people, but I'm certainly happy to sort of talk about it and to maybe encourage you to think more about it. Okay. But think about what you value, whether it's your health, whether it's the place of origin of a food item, the way it's processed, what it is you want to put into your body from a processed food standpoint, and maybe other considerations. And then go forth and compile your shopping list. All right. Thank you. All right. Next up. The question is, would having the certificate aid me in getting a job in this field? So what I'm reading here is, would a certificate of completion of a Rouxbe course be helpful in getting a job in the restaurant industry, perhaps, is what I'll read into this. And, I'll say that it can help. There are many people who want to enter the restaurant industry or the food industry in some fashion with no experience at all. And they're going to knock on a back door and fill out an application and ask for a job. And if you're standing right next to that person, and let's say you don't have any experience, but you do have the educational credential of having, finished a course of study, and you have a certificate of completion to show, then, arguably, you would have a leg up on the person next to you. Okay. I will also add that, regardless of whether one has a certificate of completion in their possession or not, and regardless of what school they graduated from or what program they completed, it will come down to that individual's personality and their work ethic as to whether they get the job and how long they keep the job. So will a certificate of completion aid you or benefit you in some way? I would say it would. But again, there are other variables at play here. And a big part of it is going to be you and the core individual that you are. All right. Thank you. All right. Next up from Kelly. Is it going to be a problem in the Plants Plus course that I don't cook with salt, oil, and sugar? No, not at all. That'll be totally up to you. We have, as I mentioned earlier in today's program, a beautiful array of students. And some are, using a little bit of salt or no salt, some oil, no oil, etc. And every situation is unique. So it's all about you learning to cook in the way that you want to cook and to enjoy the food that you prepare. And you're going to find that the majority of our practice recipes, may call for, some salt or some oil or some sugar. So it's going to be up to you to experiment, to start to cut back on those ingredients to a point where they're satisfactory to you, or to eliminate them entirely, and then to start to, introduce other flavorings or aromatics that will provide satisfaction to you from the palate standpoint as well as the olfactory standpoint. So smell and aroma, right, become very important factors. So you're thinking about fresh herbs and spices and vinegars as categories to begin with. Okay. And it's a journey. So, have fun with it. The idea of our Ruby courses is to give you those foundational building blocks, to give you insight, to give you confidence to be a better cook. And then it's going to be up to you to run down the path the rest of the way. All right. Thank you. All right, Pamela. Cooking utensils, non-coated or non-toxic coating. Is there a difference? Where do you purchase safe cooking pots and pans? Okay, so let me think about this for a couple of seconds here. So cooking utensils, if something is coated and the claim is to be a non-toxic coating, it's going to be up to you, the consumer, to do your due diligence to come to a comfortable place, between you and the utensil, okay, before you buy it. If an item is non-coated, then I see. So, one of the concerns could be that you might have some elements of the metal that leach out into your food, especially when it bumps up against acidic ingredients. But, let's just say we talk about stainless steel items. Stainless steel is fairly non-reactive, with most food items. And there's certainly different qualities of stainless steel. And, there again, it's going to be up to you as a consumer to do your due diligence, to read consumer reviews, and then to find the product, the quality level of which is going to meet your needs or your expectations. Okay. Um, if things are coated in some way, there's a good chance that over time that coating will start to come off. That's been my experience anyway. And so when it comes to cookware, as an example, I consider any coated cookware to be a disposable item because sooner or later, for example, a nonstick surface will accumulate what I call micro scratches and will become a stick surface, and you'll need to or want to replace it. And it could be a matter of months, it could be a matter of years, but that day will come, at least in my experience. So I avoid nonstick coated, cookware. In terms of where do I purchase safe cookware, stainless steel is very easy to use. It's easy to clean. It takes bumps and bruises, so to speak, and still looks good. And go to whatever store is going to carry the brand that you're opting for based upon the due diligence that you have performed. Okay, and go forth and enjoy cooking. Thank you. Hello, Ken. If I wanted to use bulk black beans in a recipe and I wanted to infuse with cumin during cooking, would I use toasted or non-toasted seeds or ground? There's you can go in any of these directions, and there isn't a wrong answer. It's really just a matter of what your preference is. If you're using a ground product, whatever it is, it's going to have greater surface area. Therefore, it will impart flavor faster and, arguably, stronger perhaps in certain ways. And also grinding a food like spices will release certain constituents in a different way than the whole food or the whole spice will. And so there can be some subtle differences in the result of foods prepared with whole spices versus ground spice. Sometimes they're not subtle. Sometimes they're much more obvious too. So I would encourage you to do some experimenting. Set up a pot of beans with ground cumin, one with coarsely crushed cumin, and one with whole cumin, and then test out the finished results and see what you like. All right. Thank you. All right, next up from Susan. Vegan diet fats, are they really better than animal fats? What is a good substitute to get a crisp on oven and frying? Regarding vegan diet fats, plant-based fats, but okay, vegan, so probably processed in some form. Well, let's just say processed plant-based fats versus animal fats. In terms of the better, again, that's something that the consumer gets to decide. The word better, right? It just sets up a subjective comparison. And if you're talking about better for health, that goes beyond the scope of our discussion today, which is to focus on food and cooking. And I would direct you toward a dietitian or a doctor of some sort who might be able to talk about that. Okay, in terms of flavor, well, that's going to be up to you. I mean, there are folks that really enjoy pork fat, for example, and wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. And so there are, we recognize there are differences between these two categories of fat. But it's going to be up to you to figure out, what you want to consume or cut back on or omit. Okay. And in terms of getting crispy food, when it comes to, oven and frying. So number one, frying implies a medium of fat, usually oil, to get you there. Okay. And that's going to give you a nice crispy result because frying is a dry heat cooking method. Okay. But it's a pretty intense one as the oil draws out moisture from the food item. Okay. And the result is this dry surface. And that gets very crispy. Um, Now, the same thing with oven cooking something. You know, with a relatively high temperature in the oven, you can start to mimic some of the effects of frying, at least on the just on the surface, um, of your foods that are coated in oil in the oven. And this is where perhaps using a small amount of oil can give you satisfying results, while cutting back on the calories and other factors that you would get from a greater amount of oil, okay, added to your oven roasted foods. Again, you have to decide on what that balance is for you. Okay. If a crispy texture is very, very important, then maybe you compromise and you add a small amount of fat, finding a happy middle point that works for you. Okay. On the other hand, if you insist on going 100% no added oil, then you need to make the compromise in texture of foods that maybe you previously enjoyed in a more crispy fried format. Okay, and those are some of those tough questions that you get to deal with related to your developing food philosophy. Okay, another thing to keep in mind here is that you can always have a little bit of a fried food item once in a while if you choose to do so. You don't need to torture yourself if that's the feeling or the experience that comes out of this. Don't beat up on yourself. Enjoy food, enjoy cooking, enjoy the camaraderie and all the other goodness that we should be associating with the food that we eat. All right. Thank you. Next up from Mandy, plant-based for people in rural cold climates where produce can be very limited at certain times of the year. What is your opinion on indoor growing systems and quality taste of produce? Go for it. I mean, if again, if that's the answer for you, if the answer is between not eating something and eating something, and you want to eat it, then you gotta do it, right? You gotta use a new technology. Maybe there is a little difference in flavor, so I would expect there to be some difference in flavor, between an item that was grown, say, hydroponically versus an item that came out of the earth, because you're picking up different elements, aspects of the terroir. When we talk about soil, and it's the place, it's whatever else, in terms of the mineral content, for example, that's present, that's being drawn up through the food, and that you may not get in a let's say a hydroponic setup. So I don't have any problems necessarily with the flavor of foods that are produced in indoor systems, but I sometimes notice differences in the intensity of flavor, for example. So it's going to be up to you, however, to judge whether you like that or not, whether you can tolerate that or not, and whether you will do that or not. All right. Thank you. From Lily, any advice about how to take good pictures of food plates? um, well, I'll say that in a couple of our courses, the Pro Plant course is one of them that comes to mind. We do have a lesson on photography basics, and it's focused on smartphones, of course, and all the functions that come along with that. And I'm not a food photographer, so I am not going to act like I am here. But I will say, take a look at some of the functions that come along, with the owner's manual of your phone, and do some experimenting, with that. Whether it's a a portrait sort of a setting or something else. And some of them even have food photography settings these days. Take pictures, with these different settings and then compare them so you can understand what the results might be. Okay, there certainly could be times when you want to take a food photo, but you don't want to use an automated food setting, for example. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of let you go and experiment in that respect. But if you're not in our pro plant course, for example, go ahead. I tell you what, go ahead and write in at support@rouxbe.com, and we can direct your question to somebody that may have more experience in this area. Thank you. Let's see. Next up from Monica, could you please explain what soy curls are, and how to cook with them? Yeah, I mean, soy curls, to the best of my knowledge, are going to be made from, some sort of a soy protein. All right. And I don't know exactly what the processing of that food is. But based on soybeans. Okay. And, often some of these components are left over after pressing oil out of seeds. Okay. And so often it could be a byproduct of the soybean oil industry. These protein and fat, the stuff that's left over then is turned into another product and sold. Okay. And so that's going to be sort of the gist of it. You can always jump online and drill deeper into a product like this. And how to cook with them. A soy product, kind of like the green jackfruit, is going to take on flavors that you add to it. And so in my experience, these, soy products, curls or otherwise, in terms of shape and size, can be aligned with a lot of different types of cuisines as you add the flavors of your choice. Okay. And then, otherwise follow the directions for the cooking, in terms of imparting that flavor, very often through a moist heat method in order to marinate or otherwise impart the flavor. And then you can finish that off with a dry heat cooking method. Often it's sauteing or roasting, for example. Thank you. All right, next up from Archana. Hello. I am part of the plant-based eating class. As we should not be using oil, is it okay to use coconut milk for some Asian dishes? The quick answer is yes, totally up to you. I will say that, if you're working with a graded assignment, to please stick with sort of the base procedure, okay, associated with that assignment. So in other words, the cooking method that's going to be emphasized. So that we can see and understand your comprehension of the process. All right. In other words, if coconut milk is added where maybe the base recipe isn't calling for it, sometimes the coconut milk can cover up the details that we need to see in an assignment. Okay. But outside of that context for your daily cooking, it's totally up to you. Okay. And, give it a try if you want to use just coconut fat or if you want to use coconut milk. Give it a try both ways and see what works best for you. All right. Thank you. And Lily is asking, how many years have you been vegan? Lily, I'm not vegan. I am an omnivore, although I would say that something in the neighborhood of 90% of my diet is plant-based. We'll go a long time here at the house without eating anything from an animal, enjoying, as I've alluded to earlier, the beautiful array of plant-based dishes. And, when I do eat plant-based and at home when we do that, we are doing our best to emphasize whole food ingredients. And I don't align myself with veganism per se, which for me, okay, going back many decades, when veganism emerged, it was very much aligned with politics, the politics of eating, and very much aligned with animal rights and the protection of animals. And uh, not that I ignore that, but that was never right, like my sole focus. And another part of the vegan sort of approach to eating over the years is that because initially there was this focus on plant-based ingredients simply to move away from animals, that many of the ingredients have been highly processed ingredients, frankly. And I'm not a fan, if you're asking for my personal opinion, okay? I'm not a fan of highly processed foods and whether they're plant-based or not. And so when it comes to cooking, I align with uh, rather than vegan cooking, plant-based cooking with an emphasis on whole foods. There's a whole discussion we can get into regarding what whole food plant-based means, because it can be very difficult, if not practically impossible, to do like seriously full-on 100% whole food plant-based cooking. At least, that's going to be the case for the vast majority of us. So we do our best. And, I do my best to emphasize whole foods at each of my meals and to avoid processed foods and, even vegan processed foods, which are no better for you than animal-based processed foods or anything else out there that is unnatural and arguably more difficult for your body to assimilate. All right. Thank you. All right. Next up from Marion. Any suggestions on how to stop the discoloration of food when using an inexpensive expandable steamer basket? The food that rests on the basket turns gray. So the thing that I do is to use some sort of a leafy item, like a piece of cabbage or lettuce as an underliner. And I will sacrifice that item by then putting the main item to be cooked on top of that. All right. Thank you. All right, Christine. Plant-based eating class, grocery list. Some dishes serve 3 to 4. Some dishes do repeat. I can freeze some. Don't want to waste anything, especially fresh fruit and veggies. Ideas other than recalculating to fewer servings. I'm doing the class alone, 1 serving per dish. Well, the other thing that comes to mind really is to invite friends over and family over and share some of those meals. Otherwise, you've mentioned the 2 things that I would suggest, and that is freezing, as well as cutting back, on the amount of food that's prepared. Giving it away or sharing the meal would be the other, the third item that comes to mind. Thank you. All right, next up. I understand that making things by hand is best, but there are so many alternative vegan options. Are there specific things that you should look for and avoid for a whole food plant-based lifestyle? So yeah, I love this question, and really it dovetails with what I've been talking about today in response to some of the earlier questions, and that is, it's really up to you and the food philosophy that you embrace. And this idea of a food philosophy is so important because if there's one thing that we do most frequently in our lives, it's eat. And, we've got a philosophy for almost everything else. Why not food? Yet so many of us haven't thought deeply about our relationship to food, the environment, the farmer, food processors, quality of food, quantity of food, place of origin, and so many other aspects of the bigger food picture. The question, I should say. So, when it comes to alternative vegan options, as I just mentioned in the last question or two, know that many of them are highly processed, and they're no better for you than any other highly processed foods. And so think about that and what it is that you want in your long-term health. Um, Arguably, many of the conveniences that have been introduced to our lives are not that good for us, certainly not in abundance. And so a better life often takes more effort on our part. And so again, you get to find that balance that works for you. Thank you. All right, next up, are there any recipes using pumfu, organic pumpkin seeds? I'm not a fan of tofu. Okay, so pumfu, as I'm familiar with it, I've never used it, okay, but pumfu is short for pumpkin tofu, and it's a tofu-like product that's based on pumpkin seeds. And my familiarity is that you can use it like tofu, and so I encourage you to give that a try, and whether it's making a scramble of some sort, or a stir fry, or adding it to a soup or a stew or something else, as you would tofu. And, if it's the flavor of tofu that you don't like, but the flavor of pumfu that you do like, then a very, quick one-to-one substitution is going to be the quick answer to begin your path of experimentation. All right. Thank you. Let's see. And next up again from Toki. I made some vegan Swedish meatballs using lentils and mushroom recently, and they were not holding well under pan frying. I used flaxseed and panko bread crumbs as a binder. Any suggestions on what to use next time to keep them together? Okay, so without knowing all the details, a couple of things come to mind. One is, avoid adding any fat, any oil, because, fat is a lubricant and it will make it difficult for the binders to bind. Okay, so in this case, your binder is coming from the flax seed. As well as, the bread product that's going to be wet, and then it's going to act as a binder to hold that together. Okay. Now, otherwise, try increasing the amount of flaxseed to get a little bit more strength, from that sticky quality. And then also to minimize the liquid as in water, right, from the lentils or possibly mushrooms, because water also acts as a lubricant and counteracts the binder. The next thing is to cut mushrooms and other ingredients smaller or small enough that the whole thing binds easily, okay? Because large pieces also act against the function of a binder, making it more difficult to hold together. All right, so give those things a try. It's going to take some experimentation on your part, but your answer is going to lie in there somewhere. All right, thank you. Next up, I like pasta, but in my area, it's difficult to find gluten-free pasta other than just spaghetti. How would you determine best when buying a pasta maker would be cost efficient? So, whether a pasta machine is going to be cost efficient to you, it's going to depend on, how frequently you really crave pasta. We don't make pasta very much at home, but we have a pasta machine because we like to make pasta when um, that urge comes. And so, one's consideration is going to be very different. But I mean, if gluten-free pasta is something that you enjoy a lot, you might start out by hand cutting your pasta. So, a pasta machine isn't necessary. Um, you can roll out the pasta and then hand cut it with a large knife, with a chef's knife. Um, Now, sometimes we might have a limitation on the rolling that we can or can't do with a rolling pin, in which case, a pasta machine, may be necessary in order for us to produce the pasta that satisfies that need or that craving. Okay. So think about it. If you have the space to store a pasta machine that you might use once in a while, if you've got the budget, to buy a pasta machine, they depending on what brand and what size you buy, what kind you buy, it can be a few $100s, or something less expensive. So look at your options, look at your situation, think about your pasta requirements in your own diet, and then go forth. Thank you. Hello, Steve. I recently replaced my old Teflon coated cookware with green pan, healthy ceramic coated pans and stock pots. The instructions say a small amount of cooking oil should be added to the cookware when using. What to do now? Um, by your question, I'm guessing that your expectation is to go 100% free of added oils. And I mean, if that's the case, you know, uh, go ahead and do oil-free sweating, which is at a lower temperature. And then, you can also find, I think, some happy medium of an oil-free saute following the Rouxbe method. Excuse me just a second. Okay. Any coated pan, I would avoid heating too much. All right. So when we show in our courses the oil-free saute using stainless steel cookware at a pretty high temperature, that's going to be too high for any coated pan. But you can sort of mimic the results at a lower temperature, but you'll need to experiment to figure out what's going to work for your pan. Okay. Coated pans generally don't brown as well as an uncoated pan, stainless steel, in the case of the discussion here. Okay. Otherwise, use a touch of oil and if that's acceptable to you, and find, some sort of a middle ground, that will get the job done for you. Thank you. Alexandra, hello. I had a question in regards of using certain alcohol ingredients, such as sake or wine. Is it a must to use those ingredients in the tasks asked to complete our recipes for grading? No, it's not. We have, as I mentioned, a beautiful array of students, and many of them don't use alcohol for a number of different reasons, and that's perfect. And so the deal is to simply omit the alcohol, or if you'd like, you can look for a non-alcoholic version if that's acceptable to you. Sometimes it is for folks, and sometimes it's not. Now, understand that what we're getting from an alcoholic beverage as an ingredient is the flavor. And, know that if you omit or substitute something else, that the end product will be a little bit different than the original. Okay. And, there's not necessarily it's not a right or wrong issue. It's just a matter of you understanding that it's going to be a little different. Okay. Now, in the case of replacing wine, if you wanted to mimic the flavor of wine, then see if you can find verjus, Verjus, which is the juice of unripened grapes. And it's going to be acidic, and it will have a grapey flavor. And somewhat reminiscent of wine. Wine goes through some different transformations as it ferments, but verjus can often get you pretty close. And it's acidic and not sweet. And so you're getting the acidity that's imparted from many cooking wines. Okay. Verjus is sometimes available from wineries, and it's sometimes available from other food sources, other grocery stores. So just look around and see if you can find that. Most sort of standard grape juices tend to be very sweet, and I would not recommend that as a substitute for wine. Okay. The other choices, again, just simply omit it and just move on with cooking. Okay. When it comes to sake, just omit it, providing you're not doing a lot of Japanese cooking. Maybe I'd have to think more deeply about the flavor that's missing from some Japanese preparations, but not a big deal in all of them. Just omit the sake, move forth, and see how you like the preparation. Okay. In a lot of the recipes that I see, the alcoholic beverage is such a small amount that omitting it is not going to be the end of the day. So just give that a try and see how you like it. Thank you. And I guess going back to your question, Alexandra, in assignments that are graded, do make brief mention. One sentence is fine as to your substitution. Okay, thank you. And next up, steel and aluminum and iron leach. And iron, okay, Alzheimer concerns. Glassware also toxic with cadmium, other heavy metals. Can Rouxbe team recommend best quality glass made in US or Canada? We can't find reliable glass pots or pans with due diligence. I don't know of any cookware that might meet your requirements. You keep on looking, I guess, in terms of maybe a group, an association out there that looks more closely at this concern, and see if you can find some like-minded people, maybe on social media, that have found success in sourcing some cookware that would be a very specialized product, a very specialized brand that would fill this rather narrow niche of cookware needs or demands, I guess. Okay. Interesting question, but I don't have any sources to share with you. Thank you. Okay. And the last question of the day is from Ken. One more question. I like baked kale chips. I tried making them by placing them in a mixing bowl and adding balsamic vinegar, tamari, and nutritional yeast. If I find the kale in this recipe to be too bitter, what might I omit or add? Okay. Well, let's see here. Start with the vinegar and see where that takes you in terms of cutting back or omitting. It depends on the nuances of each of these ingredients. Okay, some of them have more prominent sweetness, some of them have more underlying acidity and bitter notes. Okay. And then, also, kale itself, depending on the type of kale and the maturity of the kale, can also have some pretty strong bitter notes. In which case you might want to increase some of the sweet components that you add. Whether it's a type of balsamic vinegar, a particular style of balsamic vinegar. Or even a little little pinch of brown sugar, perhaps, or jaggery to balance some of the bitterness. Okay. So while I don't have a specific answer for you, because there are all of these ingredients you mentioned, including the kale itself, are variables. So there's enough moving parts here that I'd have to, just isolate one by one and then experiment. And I hope you will do that too. All right. Thank you very much. And to all of you, I hope that you will approach cooking with an open mind and with an open heart, and to be prepared for experimentation, to find the best way forward to meet the expectations of your palate and those that you cook for. And I look forward to answering your questions again next time. And until then, happy cooking. Thank you.